Well, thank you very much, and I want to say that it's a great honor for me to share this panel with Governor Grégoire and also with my two colleagues from Canada, Gordon and Greg Salinger and Governor Doyle. I want to acknowledge there's also Premier Ariak of Nunavut who's with us in this room, and also Minister Thomas of the Yukon, and I see a colleague from the Quebec Assembly, Mr. McKay, who's with us today. And Canada has a strong representation at this meeting of the COP15. In fact, the majority of provinces and territories are here, and that's not a coincidence. In fact, it is worth stopping a moment to observe how these meetings have evolved over the years. I was in Rio, and from Rio to today, I think part of the story on climate change will be, in good part, what has happened at the subnational level. And there is something that has happened, that has changed over the last 20 years in the role and the recognition of subnational, of federated states, of provinces and regional governments and their involvement. And I have my own theories on that. I think one of them is quite rapidly the fact that we are experiencing globalization. And as integration happens, sometimes whether we want it or not, we are pushing our relationship to levels of jurisdiction that we were not working at before. And as globalization is happening, I think you'll see roles of federated provinces and states emerge more and more into the future. And the story also around our role, and this is the title of this panel, Subnational Leadership Beyond Cap and Trade. The story of the last few years is one of recognition of our role in dealing with this issue. 50 to 80% of what will be done to reduce greenhouse gas emissions will be done by our levels of government. And every structure of government is different. Within Canada, for example, we have one of the most decentralized federations in the world. And we are responsible for our own jurisdictions. It is not possible in Canada to attain objectives of reducing greenhouse gas emissions unless we are at the table. It's impossible to attain those objectives. And that is true if you start looking at what's happening elsewhere. There's also the fact that we are governments that are closer to the people who elected us, and that by definition deal with a lot of issues that affect people in their daily lives. And so when you examine this, it makes a lot of sense that we be involved. Add to that the fact that we need to be totally engaged and committed. It's not enough for us to be referred to thought of. And national governments could conclude the best agreement in the world on Friday here and attain all the objectives, but they need to engage their citizens. And they need to start by those who have very direct responsibilities, and that happens to be us. Now, part of the story that needs to be told is that by default, we've also been leading. And Governor Grégoire referred to it, and it's true back home in Canada. Since the national governments were not moving on this issue, we moved ahead and did not wait. And that's why we've entered into agreements that would have been unthinkable only 20 years ago. The WCI, the Climate Registry, all these other organizations that have come forward and where governments, federated governments, have decided to go beyond their borders and work together. There's another factor that comes into play. If you look at North America, we have an Eastern Canadian provinces and North England Governors Forum that has been meeting for the last 30 years. If you look at the work they've been doing the last 30 years, the mainstream of the work has been about the environment and issues. Why? Well, because we represent one single environmental or ecosystem that borders don't represent. And so there's a recognition of all of this as we move ahead that I happen to think is very positive and very encouraging. And so we have been leading on this issue, and what our perspective on all of this happens to be more optimistic also. There was one of the things that emerged from the Leaders Summit that was hosted today. We've had our third Leaders Summit. The first one was in Montreal at COP11. The second one was last year in Poznan. This was the third, with the attendance of 60 leaders from around the world. And what emerges when you look at our text, our statement that has 2 pages, is that there's a new economy that is emerging. And we see that. And we can see that opportunity. So this isn't just about the costs. It's about the opportunities that are out there and whether or not we will seize that opportunity. And that's the way I believe we need to look at this. Now, in the case of Quebec, why is it that we are so committed to this? Well, there's a very simple reason. We are going to be affected more rapidly and more dramatically than other places in the world because we live in a northern environment. And I'll give you one illustration, an interesting one. It's the one I use when I try to convince an audience that this issue of climate change will affect them in their lives. At the north of Quebec, in the area of Nunavut, in the Northwest Territories, there is a new maritime route that will open up very soon, probably within the next 50 years. This will have a dramatic impact on our lives. It will have a very important political impact. This new maritime route happens to be Canadian territory. It belongs to us, even if our American neighbors do not recognize this route as being Canadian territory. It is ours. And just imagine, I say that it's going to be a very real political issue between Canada and Europe and the United States. Now, think of this. Think of what it means for us when this will be the first real maritime route to open since Christopher Columbus. And the impact on our lives will be tremendous. We happen to believe another thing. Unless we lead by example, and if we're going to be affected, it is impossible for us to persuade anyone else to act, whether it's the United States or India or China. Unless we are ready to demonstrate that we are committed and we are going to do what needs to be done, how can we ever persuade our neighbors to do as much? And Canada has learned a great deal in this regard. We look at the ongoing movie on CO2 emissions. I compare it to SO2 emissions in the 80s. Any of you familiar with that debate on acid rain will remember that the American administration at the time denied it was an issue. We had to work them into a position where we named emissaries to study the matter. Finally, the science was recognized. Once the science was recognized, finally solutions were envisaged, debates happened, and the Clean Air Act of 1990 was voted by the Bush administration, Father Bush, in 1990. Canadians have a lot of experience in dealing with this issue, but one thing we knew, it would be impossible to arrive at a solution without the United States being part of it, being engaged, and committing resources to dealing with SO2 emissions, which, by the way, leads to the cap-and-trade issue, which led to the first cap-and-trade scheme within North America. So is it possible to arrive at these solutions? The answer is yes. We're going to be doing our part. We set the most ambitious target in North America to reduce greenhouse gas emissions, -20 by 1990 levels for 2020. We put in the first carbon tax in North America. We have the highest level of renewable energies, total renewable energies in Quebec. We are also blessed with hydropower that we are going to use a lot to produce clean and renewable energy. And we put forward a transit policy. We also put forward a green technology policy. We're doing all these things because we believe in it. But we also believe it's going to make our lives better. And that's why we will continue to lead, hoping that the rest of the world will be part of this. Thank you very much.